Hello everybody, Gabe here, and I've been thinking a lot about superhero movies lately because, well, I've had nothing better to do and whatever. Anyway, so yeah, I've been thinking about the relationship between superheroes and film, and the fact that we generally consider superheroes to be synonymous with comic books. We always think of superheroes as being solely tied to comic books in terms of their origins. But there are a number of great superhero movies that feature entirely original superheroes. And those are some of my favorite among the entire genre. So I thought we could spotlight those movies today in a top 5 original superhero movies list. Now, to establish ground rules, I'm looking at films that I consider genuine, bona fide superhero films. Or at least films that have a significant overlap into that genre. So I'm excluding comedies and parodies, not that many of those would make the list anyways. Also, we're looking at superhero films that feature their own original superhero that has not appeared in any other media. So that excludes the likes of Zorro and the Scarlet Pimpernel, I guess. And to get the disappointment out of the way right now, no, Blank Man is not on this list. Sorry, but don't go sending me no hate mail, you Blank Man fanboys. So with all that said, let's just jump into it. At number 5 is The Toxic Avenger. Released by the infamous Troma Company, The Toxic Avenger is one of the most vile, gory, and just obscene superhero flicks out there, and I love every second of it.
No thanks.
The plot centers around a geek named Melvin, who works at a gym that's mostly frequented by total psychopaths who run people over for complete amusement. And these very psychopaths then play a cruel prank on Melvin that involves him falling into a vat of toxic waste, thus turning him into everybody's favorite superhero from New Jersey, the Toxic Avenger. I understand this sounds like a parody, but there is a real attempt to make a superhero film. It does adhere to that formula, and I think the Toxic Avenger does work as a superhero. And there are plenty of genuine bad guys in this movie for Toxie to vanquish, giving you that triumphant feeling that you only get in a good superhero movie. Now, it sounds like I'm talking about utter trash to most of you, but this is a unique movie that should not exist, but I'm so grateful that it does. It shows independent filmmaking at its most brash, at its most bold and creative. It's a movie made out of pure enthusiasm and passion with some technical merits to go with it. Despite its low budget, The Toxic Avenger does boast some well-choreographed fight scenes and some surprisingly excellent special effects. So yeah, it's schlocky as hell, but if you can stomach some twisted gore, then I would definitely recommend it to anyone who's looking for a different kind of superhero. At number 4, Chronicle. The tonal opposite of The Toxic Avenger, this is a grim, dark, and grounded portrayal of 3 high schoolers who get telekinesis from a mysterious orb that they find in the woods. Like the next movie on this list, Chronicle takes comic book mythology and uses that to examine our main characters. And they're entirely fleshed out 3-dimensional people with their own frustrations, ambitions, flaws, and desires. The found footage aspect is forced at times, but it does overall add to the grounded and realistic tone that lends Chronicle its power. We watch these very creative uses of their telekinesis with a sense of believability about the whole thing that we would never get from even the most spectacular of blockbusters.
Okay, see the guy chewing the gum? I'm gonna get the gum, pull it right out of his mouth. Okay, I got him. Wait, why are we running?
And while Chronicle makes for an okay superhero origin, it makes for a fantastic supervillain origin. Andrew just might be one of the most sympathetic and tragic supervillains of the past decade. Even through all the atrocities that he commits, we never lose sight of who he is at his core, and that's a desperate, painfully awkward adolescent who's just doing the best he can. Dane DeHaan does a wonderful job of bringing that character to life, to bringing his anguish and his pain onto screen. So that's why Chronicle's at number 4. At number 3 is M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable. Unbreakable is just a fine piece of filmmaking. And as a comic book fan, as a superhero fan, there is so much thought put into the mythology of comic books and how that could be applied to a grounded reality such as our own. At the time, Unbreakable didn't do so well at the box office or with audiences because it was ahead of its time. It was 2000, before the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, and the public wasn't really savvy to comic book lore yet. But even if you take the entire comic book angle out of the movie, this is still a fascinating character study of a man who just doesn't know what to do with his life. He feels like something is missing and he can't put his finger on it, not until something incredible happens, something that reveals something truly spectacular about himself. Unbreakable touches on a very universal feeling of misplacement and identity crisis. And Bruce Willis, man, this might be my favorite Bruce Willis performance. Just the sadness and the pain that he just emotes with his eyes alone. I mean, the man is sorely underrated as a dramatic actor. I don't know if we'll ever see a performance as good as this from him ever again. We certainly didn't see it in Glass. But this is a perfect showcase of his talents, as well as M. Night Shyamalan's. I mean, what a storyteller with the camera. The way he can use lighting and camera movements to convey the most nuanced of emotion, or to convey just basic information or exposition. Even though there is a lot of exposition in the movie, I don't feel like he's holding my hand the way some of the current blockbusters do. This might also be my favorite Samuel L. Jackson role, and I think it was a brilliant stroke of genius to cast him in this part. Sam Jackson doesn't play the typical character he's been playing for the last 20 years. He takes that swagger of his, that bravado, but he brings it to this fragile, powerless character, but still manages to give that character power. Say what you will about Elijah, but he never comes across as pathetic, and the script never demeans him. He's desperate, to be sure, but you have to admire his ambition and his tenacity in the face of a crippling disability. Now, with how great I genuinely find this movie to be, you might wonder why it's not at number 1, and that's because it really worked better as a character drama more so than a superhero movie. That's why I was so skeptical of Glass, because Unbreakable is not a superhero movie in the sense that, say, Spider-Man is. It doesn't beg for its own cinematic universe. It's a character study first and foremost, because if you take David Dunn as just a superhero and compare him to the likes of Batman, I mean, there's not a lot to the guy. There's not even a whole lot of action in the movie. The most that we see is him chokeholding a guy. And because this is a top 5 superheroes list, I think that counts somewhat in putting it only number 3. Also, some of the plotting and dialogue writing, a little forced, a little cliched, very Shyamalan, though definitely not the most egregious that we'll see in the coming years. But that's why Unbreakable is at number 3. So for my next 2, I'm torn between the one I love the most and the one I respect the most, the one I think is just the best film. And given that I've put my critic hat on, I'm going to have to put Darkman at number 2. Now, Darkman is maybe the most underrated movie made of all time. Even diehard Sam Raimi fans don't seem to have much to say about Darkman. I think it's one of his finest accomplishments. I mean, it's just below Spider-Man 2 for me, right there, grabbing onto it. You might be asking what Darkman's about, but what isn't Darkman about? It's about revenge, it's about pain, it's about identity, it's about anguish. The cinematic innovation going on here, just what Sam Raimi is able to put together into one cohesive story. He grabs from the Universal Monster movies, he grabs from his own Evil Dead movies. He delivers a genuinely tragic story that, yeah, I'd put at the level of Shakespeare. The visuals are striking. The camera work just is, like Shyamalan's, such a storyteller on its own. Liam Neeson gives his best performance out of any of these revenge movies, and I'm convinced of that. That's like a fact to me. Larry Drake as Robert G. Durant is one of the creepiest bad guys that nobody ever talks about. The dude just gives me chills, and I think he's a perfect bad guy. Darkman has one of the most striking looks to him, just that whole costume. I mean, if I ever went cosplaying, that's definitely what I would go as. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I even have my own review of this movie on my individual channel, so I can just put the link down there if you want to hear my full thoughts. But such an amazing movie. Such a movie that I love. Just such an important movie to me. It was the first R-rated movie I ever saw, and this was a hell of an introduction to the darker side of filmmaking. But let's not kid around here. Darkman's not trying to be necessarily a great movie. It's trying to be a thrill ride, which it is. And I think Sam Raimi really tapped into something there. But there is one movie on this list that is better, so let's get into that. And my number one pick is RoboCop. I mean, I was being somewhat cheeky about Darkman, you know, like having so much going on. But RoboCop legit does have so much going on. It has action. It has biting satire on capitalism. It has existential human character drama. It has amazing special effects. In short, I think it's easily one of the best movies ever made, and I think you're just a total snob to overlook why I would say that. I mean, there's just so much indisputable proof that RoboCop is just a great piece of filmmaking. Paul Verhoeven really showed that he was just a master on the camera when he wanted to be. Even though he's had some blockbuster movies since then, what he's able to do in RoboCop, he can take the same basic idea and pull two completely different emotions out of it. We have two scenes where people are blown apart by guns. One is hysterical. It's one of the funniest scenes of the movie, and it's one of the funniest scenes in all of cinema. But compare that to the scene where our main character gets gunned down in what would lead to his transformation as RoboCop. And it's so traumatizing. It takes such a toll on you. And I already cringe whenever the scene starts. Before any guns are fired, I'm already cringing because you can just feel it. And I don't know whose idea it was to inject RoboCop with such political overtones, but whoever did that made a bold choice because Reaganomics was at its most popular, and this could have easily backfired on RoboCop, made it too political for people, like the way anybody complains about a movie that has even the slightest political hints, but they went for it. They went for broke, and just so much to get through with this movie. If there's one other thing I have to mention, one thing that, like, a scene in this movie that you will not find this kind of scene in any other, like, major blockbuster. The scene where RoboCop goes back to his old home after, you know, starting to rediscover his old identity. Just perfect. It's perfection. It's genuinely more emotional than anything you're going to find in The English Patient. It's a perfect showcase for Peter Weller's uncanny ability to emote so much behind that metallic exterior. But Peter Weller, there are people who have won Academy Awards that could not do what Peter Weller did in this movie. Alright guys, well that's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this list. Like the video if you want, subscribe if you want, and make sure to check out everybody else's videos on One Day Media. Alright, this is Gabe, signing out.